great to see so many faces here. It will be an exciting term of lectures. I'm starting it, but I'm very much looking forward to having a host of celebrity speakers coming to deliver different aspects. Those of you doing paper 4 will recognize some of the names from the reading you have been doing. For example, Horst Simon from the Freie Universität Berlin, who has written extensively both on forms of address and is also the advisor on gendered language for the German government, will be speaking in week 6. Henk de Berg also came for previous lecture series when he was speaking on rhetorical devices, comparing speeches by Hitler and by Trump, and I think it's as pertinent as ever. And he has been, since going on, looking at features of totalitarian language, one of the topics of the paper 4 syllabus, now looking at the so-called Alternative für Deutschland and their calculated taboo breaking, including the slogan Alles für Deutschland, which on the surface makes a case for Alice Weidel as Parteivorsitzende, but plays with a banned slogan Alles für Deutschland, which was a Nazi propaganda take. So what we are going to try in the series this term is to cover linguistic topics that have a social-political element to it, starting with translation as a particularly kind of a German discipline, and why German literature has been much stronger in translation, both practice and theory, than, for example, English literature, is a topic that will also be discussed next week by Klaus Ackermann, who is a descendant of the Ackermann. Anybody know who? Have you ever encountered the name Ackermann? Over there? Where? I can't remember. Anybody for Ackermann? He was the secretary of Goethe. Goethe's Gespräche mit Ackermann are the most important source for us knowing about how Goethe's Faust, for example, Faust 2 came into being. He is an academic and translator. It has been analyzing why Germans in the 19th century claimed that der deutsche Shakespeare is better than the English Shakespeare, because through the translation, the Shakespeare's plays and sonnets could be updated for a contemporary audience. So if you go to a performance in Stratford or whatsoever, you have to listen to Shakespeare in the original, because you can't really update Shakespeare in English. So you have lots of dead jokes, or jokes that aren't funny any longer, because the language use has changed. Gay means something else than it meant in the 17th century. Insider references to cultural performances at that time don't work, But if you translate Shakespeare into German, you can update all of that. And, the first important Shakespeare translator was an important author himself, Christoph Martin Wieland, who actually features also in translation theory. We'll come at the very end briefly to it, because he's the point of reference when Goethe writes his important essay Über das Übersetzen as part of his Noten und Abhandlungen zum besseren Verständnis des westöstlichen Divan. So, westöstliche Divan, his attempt of verdeutschen, to import, to transfer Eastern poetry, Persian, Turkish, and make it part of German culture, to enrich German culture, which he thought of being tired through new impulses from the East. So, verdeutschen, übersetzen, dolmetschen is really a core activity of literary production in Germany. And I'm not sure whether any of you have followed a recommendation I've issued, I think, several times, to read Neil MacGregor's Germany Memories of a Nation, or listen to the podcasts. He read German at New College, so a lot of the examples he uses in his book are inspired by the syllabus. And since the Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen has been part of the syllabus since 1917, since the 400th anniversary of the publication of 95 Theses, Luther's Bible translation and the Sendbrief feature prominently in that book. All right, let's start with some terminological issues. The word übersetzen, translation comes into English via French from the Latin, translatio, that which is brought across. Any of you who did Latin grammar will know the past principle of ferre is latum, ferre tuli latum. So transfer and translation are actually etymologically from the same Latin word, to bring across. And in Old English, translation actually still means to ferry something across a river. And that is in German still the case. You just stress it differently. If you say übersetzen, it's the process of, the intellectual process of translating something from one language into the other. If you stress it on the first syllable, übersetzen, then it's the ferryman taking you across the river to the other shore. And this literal sense has been kept alive by translation theorists who are talking about the different shores. So you have the side A, which is the standpoint of the reader or viewer, and you have the shore B, which is the work of art, which you want to convey, another metaphorical word, to your audience. And so you have two basic ways of doing this transfer. You can either take the boat across, pick up what is on shore B and bring it back to A. I'd present it to the reader without the reader having to make any effort of getting into the boat, exploring the other shore. In later translation theory also called domesticating, because you keep at home. Or you can invite the reader to step into the boat, come with you to the other shore, explore this foreign text, the foreign concept, in its own setting, the foreignization approach. And if you read the most influential German translation treatises, such as the aforementioned Goethe essay in Noten und Abhandlung, or even more influential Schleiermachers über die verschiedenen Methoden des Übersetzens, they will speak in these terms about it. Also on terminology, translation, in English is a loan word from Latin via French, because it keeps the letters of the original text, while Übersetzung is a loan translation, whereby every element of the original word is separately translated. As you know, German prefers making new words by compound production to get creative with the existing elements of the language. So in German, you more often have loan translations of words, while in English, you more often have loan words, because they take in the whole stock of French-based words. So in English, you more often talk about, instead of loan translation, which is a loan translation from Lehnübersetzung, so from the German terminology, because translation terminology was developed in German, but you use then in English the French word Kalk for it. So that's slightly Knoten im Kopf about all these terminological interdependency. Just to honor the spirit of this place, the Oxford English Dictionary is being produced in Walton Street and OUP, the Oxford University Press. Any of you who haven't been in there, it's very recommendable. They have, for example, a museum of print culture, which is very enjoyable. It also partly funds us. So Oxford University Press is run as a charity, and all proceedings go into financing university research. That has also first the literal meaning, which still survives in the expression, the translation of a saint. So if a saint's body is transferred from one place to the other, it's called a translation. Quite often you have the feast, for example, the body of St. Nicholas, which was translated, or one could say stolen, from East Asia to Italy is celebrated in addition to the normal Saints' Day, which is celebrated on the day when somebody died. When I first came to England to take up a job at Newcastle University, I was very confused by calls being offered called clinical translation, because I thought it was something for linguistic students to study medical expressions in different languages, but it turns out it's translation in that sense is the practical application of theoretical medical knowledge. So that act of translation. Oh yeah, what I should also say is anything that ends in io in Latin or cio in tion, T-I-O-N in English, or in German, can normally mean two things: the process of doing something and the end result. So when you're talking about Über-setzung, it can both mean the act of actively being involved, what you do in class with lectors, and it can mean the finished product. And that is the way this abstracta ending has been carried over from Latin via French to the vernaculars. But what we are going to deal with exclusively is number 2. Predominantly just with 2A, namely the action or process of turning from one language into another. But there is a gray area also in how to translate something into a different medium. So if you render a play into a film, perhaps in another language, is that a translation in the strict sense or not? So we can also think about where do we apply the borders of translation. Do we think of glossing as a translation process? So you might know that about half of the vocabulary we have from Old High German times we only have because school children, so little girls and little boys in the monastic schools, provided themselves with crib sheets for their translation classes of Latin by using the pointy tip of the stylus, not for their wax tablets, but to doodle in the margins of the parchment manuscripts. The parchment as skin has a certain dermatological thickness, and you can indent it, leading to so-called scratch glosses, or in German Griffelglossen. Griffel is the one you grip with your fingers, or the stylus. Since they annotated predominantly words that were rare, we have a plethora of words which we otherwise wouldn't have because they wouldn't be used in a normal everyday context, such as all the technical elements of a plow which are needed to understand Virgil's Georgica, or military vocabulary. But we aren't looking at that. What is more of a gray area, particularly being a medievalist, how far do you take a paraphrase to be a translation? because when Luther ridicules previous translators for not getting it right, he doesn't really account for the way in which most German readers would have encountered biblical material, which would have been in narrative retellings, a bit like you might know from a children's version of the Bible that smoothes out different edges. So we have currently as a visitor Madeleine Hieret, who knows Anna from the project Der österreichische Bibelübersetzer. And I think you take an approach to translation that would include also further paraphrases as part of translation, because to be able to convey to a vernacular audience complex Bible stories, you have to accommodate for with explanations, expansions, repackaging of the content. I'm also not looking at the to be context. A more tricky question is actually literature translatable? So Roman Jakobson claimed that poetry by definition is untranslatable because you can only stay true to some elements of it. You can't have a literal translation of the words while having a perfectly working rhyme scheme. If you ever have sung a hymn translated from German into English, you'll know you encounter very strange words in the rhyme, because German poetry and hymns tend to have at least half of the rhymes as feminine rhymes, so stressed on the penultimate syllable. You have a plethora of German words stressed on the penultimate syllable because you have the unstressed final endings. Since English lost most of its final unstressed syllables, you have to go for much choicier words, normally loan words via French, to fill the rhyme scheme with singable words. If you don't want it to be sung, then it's easier. You can just change a feminine rhyme ending to a masculine rhyme ending. And you are better off. Another important metaphorical area is that of interpretation, which derives from the Latin interpres, that is somebody who is the in-between speaker. And so Mercury in Latin, or Hermes in Greek, is called the interpres deorum, the interpreter of the god, because he flies between the different realms. My all-time favorite Netflix series, screened, I think 2 years ago now, Chaos, K-A-O-S, produced by a number of Oxford graduates, a retelling of the Greek myths, and Hermes plays an important role in there, because he is the patron of poets and thieves and tricksters. So a famous saying is that every translator is a liar, basically. And that comes from the inability to preserve all things. So every translation is biased. So in Italian it works best. Traduttore and traditore are nearly the same. So the traitor and the translator are linguistically closely related. Interestingly, in Middle High German, neither of the words for interpres nor translator are common. They are both used, so we know them from Old High German glosses. They existed, but what Luther uses in his Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen is a loan word. And that has a really long, fascinating history behind it. Dolmetscher comes from Turkish dilmaç, which is like Hermes, the go-between, the negotiator, most often used in a military context. You have two armies facing each other off, and between the lines, there's somebody going back and forth, speaking both languages and trying to negotiate. That in turn goes back to talami, meaning intermediary, a word from the Mitanni language, so an East Asian, a Near East language, now in, I'm not quite sure which country it is now, but Asia Minor. And that traveled from Asia Minor via Turkey to Eastern Europe through the Slavic languages. So in Russian, the word tolmach is used, and first is attested in the 13th century. Originally retaining the Slavic T in Tolmetze, and then only in the early New High German period, the strong noun der Tolmetze becomes Tolmetzer and then Dolmetscher in the 16th century and Luther's time. But it's still very much connected with the notion of negotiation and of speaking. And so this is a deliberate choice on Martin Luther's part not to go for the word that you might expect if you read any of Middle High German literature, such as Gregorius or Helmbrecht, where the process of translation from French into German is called bedeuten, to translate something by making sense in German to it. In modern German, it would be verdeutschen. I'm not sure, Madeleine, which words are used by the österreichische Bibelübersetzer for translation?
He always starts with die Evangelie Deutsch.
Yeah, so die Evangelie Deutsch as, yeah. That is actually also something Luther occasionally uses. So when he translates other things, he goes for example, he translates some of the mystics, Tauler, so that would be Tauler Deutsch. But here he deliberately goes for the term that is associated not with written translation, but with the process of oral communication and negotiation. So we'll come later to the place in the Sendbrief where he talks, you should try to figure out how the angel would have spoken if the angel had addressed Mary in German. So that is really his approach to translation, and that is one translation approach that goes back to antiquity. So for Deutsch, interesting, as you know, Düte and Deutsch are related, but it's also related to words Tausend und Daumen. And the Daumen probably because you use your Daumen to number things, at least if you're German. For English people, one is the yeah. So one in German is the thumbs up. There's one film, I think. Yeah. Yeah, Inglourious Bastards, where somebody is recognized because he makes the wrong number sign, and yeah, instead of using the thumb for one, using the Zeigefinger for one. So why 1,000? I have no idea. I haven't looked, but I also wanted to show you the use in Middle Low German, partly to show that it's a German phenomenon across the dialects, and partly to highlight the newest digital resource for studying historic German, which is the Mittelniederdeutsches Wörterbuch, which went online in January. So yeah, 2 weeks ago, exactly. Is a brilliant resource if you want to compare, for example, for your first essay on what is Middle High German, if you want to look up the Low German equivalents of things. And also to honor one of the pioneers of historical linguistics in Germany, Agathe Lasch, who was a brilliant lexicographer, single-handedly really thought up the structure for this modern German dictionary, because the previous big German dictionary, the Deutsches Wörterbuch, had started with the Brothers Grimm, and nobody since then had really systematically thought through how to start a dictionary. And the whole lexicography project stopped after 2/3 through the first volume because she was of Jewish descent, sent to a concentrationslager and murdered. So a really horrible thought, and showing the absurdity of somebody who has done more than most other people for the German language being murdered as supposedly non-German. So I try to keep her memory alive. So the normal term would have been, in the 16th century, verdeutschen, or in Middle Low German, düdischen, which means both to turn into the vernacular and also to make the underlying meaning clear. I had more on this, but I see that the time is really running ahead. So I'll start at the very beginning with antique translation theory. The famous Rosetta Stone, the red dot should be, I moved the map, and the red dot for Rosetta didn't move. So Rosetta is in the Nile Delta somewhere there, and you can see the stone in the British Museum, which allowed to crack hieroglyphs by comparing the translation into Greek of the Egyptian text. Just to show that translation is as old, again the red dot, so Alexandria isn't off the map, it's also in the on the coastline of that. And that was really the antique hub of critical text studies and translation, where all people met. So the displaced Jews met with a learned priest of the Egyptian tradition, with enterprising Greeks, Romans coming to congregate there, and needing to negotiate across languages. It was a center for the exegesis of Homer, whose Greek at that point in the 2nd, 1st century BC already was so out of date that it needed help for reading, and so they started punctuation, which is a really important step on the road of literacy, to know how syntactic elements related to each other. So I'm teaching the German souls directly after this translation from early New High German. My top tip always is, even when reading early New High German, first introduce modern punctuation to be able to piece the text together. It was the center of Jewish translation, so Bible translation from Hebrew into Greek started there. And the first library system was worked out there. And so the classification in terms of subject areas, in terms of format, which is still in use in the Tellurian, originates there. I skip several centuries, or just give a very brief overview of Bible translation, color-coded, which is also important to understand than Luther's challenges when translating the Bible, because the Bible in itself is a multilingual text. And the New Testament is written by people for whom Greek was the second language, which they mastered to a varying degree. So Mark's Greek is really rough, while Luke had a degree in medicine and writes at least something like an EU English equivalent of Greek. But you have to kind of figure out what the angel actually said in Aramaic to marry behind the Greek words. And that is something that Jerome, the patron saint of translators, did, who was commissioned by the Pope to standardize the competing translation of single books of the Bible done more or less on a makeshift basis and to put it on a proper philological basis. And I'd say he is the single most important inspiration for Luther, even though Luther is very loath of naming Jerome, since he's seen as one of the stalwarts of the kind of Catholic side. But if you read side by side Jerome's translation prefaces to the biblical books and Luther's Entry vom Dolmetschen, you'll recognize so many elements. He's really the one starting off the word for word versus sense for sense debate in translation studies. There is a funny anecdote actually about his, whether you think it funny, I'm not sure, but Jerome tells in his autobiography that he was first translating the Bible in a very free style, really taking the sense for sense as far as possible, because he just didn't like the ruddiness of particularly Mark, and so the kind of schwerfällige Cadenza. So he polished it up. But then he had a dream where he was standing at the doorway of heaven, knocking on heaven's door, and an angel opened and asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "Sum Christianus, I'm a Christian." And the angel told him, "No, Ciceronianus is, non Christianus. You are more beheld to Cicero than to Christ." And from then on, he claims he translated much more according to the style of the original biblical books, to stay true to the fact that Mark wasn't a brilliant rhetorician, but a fisherman, but to put the truth to the doctrine above stylistic brilliance. And that is something that Luther also discusses, that he says, I could have gone further and being more idiomatic and easy to read, but there are certain points where I stop because being faithful to the exact meaning is more important. So Jerome's significance is this starting this debate, but also the call to turn to the sources. So he always says the Hebraica veritas, the truth of the Hebrew. So not translating from the Septuagint, so the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was the text circulating, but rather going back to the sources. I had a lovely long interlude on Williram, which I'm skipping now, and coming for the last 5 minutes to the Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen. I've given a fully dedicated lectures to the Sendbrief a couple of times already, and that's all on the playlist Tiny URL paper for historical linguistics. So if you want a long spiel, go to that. I'll directly turn now just to the translation specific elements of the Sendbrief. So the translation situation in Luther's time is that Jerome's translation of the Bible, the so-called Vulgate, Vulgata meaning simply the popular Bible or the vernacular Bible, had become the default form, so much so that his translation had been claimed to be the inspired text. So if you read, for example, the Wycliffite translation of the Bible, which was done at the site of St. Edmund Hall, obviously, you will see in between, in the Bible translation, Jerome says thus. So we are following Jerome. But Luther wanted to go back to the original text. So while in medieval times, for example, Ottfried von Weissenburg, but also the österreichische Bibelübersetzer would use the Latin sources, he skips back to the Old Testament and New Testament editions, and that was only possible because the philological basis in the 16th century had been established with Erasmus von Rotterdam and his revision of the Greek New Testament. So I'm skipping now all of the Sendbrief proper, just going for the last minute on the impact that the Sendbrief had. And that is establishing translation as a process and not as a finished product that is inspired and monolithic and can't be changed. On that, to go to decide for one or the other way of translation isn't a pragmatic choice, it's really always a programmatic choice. So if you go for a free translation, it's not because it's easier, but because you think it's truer to the original. If you translate other elements more literally, it's also because you think this is something that has been. And something more implicit than explicitly said by him, a philological decision is always also a political decision, and social linguistics is dependent on historical linguistics. So this then becomes hugely influential for the development of German literature, and I've just listed 4 texts that explicitly list Luther's translation as their inspiration. Among them also the Jewish translation by Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig in the 20th century. Their translation of the Hebrew Bible starts with their engagement with Luther's translation principles. And one of the most influential intellectual German treatises of the 20th century, Walter Benjamin's Die Aufgabe des Übersetzers. All right, we are at the end, so hopefully see you next week, taking a very specific and very exciting, I think, case of translation into German as starting point, Klaus Eckermann on translating Wieland. Thank you. Wait a moment. Just a second, I have to...